Hello, my name's Thelina. The day I lost my job, my mother-in-law texted, "Pack your things, failures don't belong here." And my husband? He called me dead weight and threw me out, right in front of our daughter. I stayed silent that day, but silence can cut deeper than screams. Do you think walking away meant I'd already lost? Or was it the very moment I began to fight back? Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to know. That morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. The light spilling through the blinds felt too bright, too harsh, like the world was moving on without me. Ruby was still asleep in her room down the hall, her soft breathing a reminder that I had to keep it together. For her, if not for myself. I sat up slowly, my head throbbing as I replayed yesterday over and over. The meeting had been short, almost cold. The HR manager didn't even look me in the eye when she said, "We're restructuring. Your position is no longer needed." No thank you for the years of loyalty, no acknowledgement of the countless nights I'd stayed late to meet deadlines, just a sterile packet slid across the desk, like I was another number on their list. I hadn't told anyone yet, not Marcus, not even Ruby, that I still owned my small consulting company, quietly thriving under the radar, or that the beach house I'd inherited from my mother was in my name alone. I had chosen silence, not because I was weak, but because peace in this house had always come at the cost of my voice. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me from my thoughts. A text lit up the screen. "Pack your things and get out. Failures don't belong here. Claire." I read the words twice, each one slicing through me. Failures. That's what she saw when she looked at me. I didn't notice Ruby had slipped into the room until she sat gently on the edge of my bed. "Mom," she asked softly, her eyes searching mine. "What's wrong?" Before I could answer, the bedroom door swung open. Marcus stood there, his jaw tight, his eyes already brimming with the kind of disdain I knew too well. "Get up," he snapped. "Claire's right. You don't belong here anymore. You're nothing but dead weight." Ruby gasped, her small hands clenching the blanket. "Dad, stop!" "Be quiet!" He cut her off sharply, his tone sharp enough to make her flinch. He strode to the corner where a suitcase sat half-packed, yanked it up, and shoved it toward me. The weight of it hit my arms, unsteady, forcing me back a step. The suitcase tipped, spilling open. Clothes tumbled to the floor, and with them a small silver pendant skittered across the hardwood. I bent quickly, my fingers closing around it. My mother's pendant. She'd given it to me the night before I got married, whispering, "This will remind you of your worth, even when others forget." I held it tightly, my throat burning. For a moment I thought about shouting, about reminding Marcus that without me, his precious image would have cracked years ago, but the words lodged in my chest. Instead, I slipped the pendant into my palm, letting its cool weight anchor me. Ruby's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please don't go." I forced a small, steady smile for her. "It's okay, sweetheart." Marcus opened the front door without another word. "Out." His voice carried finality, as if I were a tenant being evicted. I stepped past him, suitcase dragging behind me. The morning air hit my face, brisk and sharp, as the door slammed shut behind me. The sound echoed in my chest, final and unforgiving. I stood there on the porch, my daughter's muffled cries faint through the walls, my hand wrapped around the pendant. I whispered under my breath, so only I could hear. She thought I'd leave with nothing, but the truth, I was only just beginning. Because what she never knew was that I had prepared for this moment all along. I sat on the porch steps, the cool air brushing against my face, heavy clouds hanging low as if they carried the weight I felt inside. Ruby slipped down beside me without a word, her small hand finding mine. Her touch was warm, steady, like she was holding me together when the rest of me was falling apart. The suitcase leaned against the railing, clothes hastily packed, spilling out in odd shapes. I tried to straighten my back, to look less broken, but the silence around us made every breath feel like a confession. Across the street, Mrs. Perry was walking her dog. She slowed her steps, pretending to check her phone, but her eyes flicked toward us. Another neighbor, Mr. Carson, stood near his mailbox, murmuring something to his wife. I caught the words carried by the light breeze. "That's the woman Marcus said lost her job." Heat rushed to my face, and I clenched my jaw. It wasn't just losing the job. It was how Marcus had framed it, painting me as a failure to anyone who would listen. I looked down quickly, wishing the earth would swallow me. Ruby squeezed my hand tighter, whispering, "Mom, don't cry." I swallowed hard, forcing back the sting in my eyes. "I'm not, sweetheart," I said softly, though we both knew it was a lie. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver pendant I'd dropped earlier. She placed it gently in my palm. "Grandma said this would always remind you who you are," she whispered. My chest tightened. That pendant was the only thing that still felt like home. I closed my fingers around it, as if holding on to my mother's voice through time. Then, through the thin walls of the house behind us, I heard it, Claire's laugh, that sharp, cutting sound I'd grown to dread. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with triumph, "we finally got rid of her." Marcus's voice followed, low but clear enough. "She'll never bounce back. She's too weak. She's been dead weight for years." I froze, my stomach twisting. Claire's words cut deeper. "Exactly. Now we can control everything without her in the way." My breath caught, and for a moment I thought I might be sick right there on the steps. They weren't just happy I was gone. They were planning to erase me. To take everything I'd built, everything I'd sacrificed for, and claim it for themselves. I considered standing up, pounding on the door, demanding to know how long they'd been plotting. But I remembered too well how Marcus could twist any confrontation, turning my anger into his proof that I was unstable. My silence had always been used against me, but so had my words. The sound of footsteps broke my thoughts. I looked up to see Officer Daniels, our neighbor from 2 houses down. He wasn't in uniform, just a gray hoodie and jeans, but the seriousness in his eyes was unmistakable. He stopped at the edge of the porch, speaking in a low tone. "Thelina, I saw what happened. If you need anything at all, you let me know. People see more than you think." I managed a faint nod. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. He gave me a firm look, the kind that carried more than words. Then he walked on, leaving his message to settle heavy in my chest. Ruby leaned into me. "Mom, what are we going to do?" I brushed a strand of hair from her face, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We'll figure it out. I promise." Inside, another burst of laughter rang out. I closed my eyes, gripping the pendant so tightly its edges dug into my skin. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would just fade away quietly, leaving them to rewrite the story of my life. But sitting there with Ruby's hand in mine, I realized silence didn't have to mean surrender. Silence could be sharp, patient, and waiting for the right moment to cut through every lie they told. As the clouds above darkened and a breeze rustled the trees, I made a silent vow. They would regret underestimating me, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning, and because sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's the sharpest blade you can carry. By the time Ruby and I reached the little cafe on Main Street, the sky had shifted into that soft gray you only see before a spring rain. I chose the corner booth, hoping the world would forget I existed for a while. The smell of roasted coffee filled the air, comforting for most people, but I could barely taste the tea I held in my hands. Ruby sat beside me, her head bent over a small sketchbook she'd pulled from her backpack. The sound of her pencil scratching paper was the only thing anchoring me. I watched people pass the window, smiling, carrying grocery bags, chatting on their phones. Their lives looked so normal, while mine felt like it had collapsed in the span of a day. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself that being here, away from Marcus's house, was at least a start. "Thelina?" I looked up. Irene. My childhood friend, someone I hadn't seen in years. She stood near the table, her eyes wide, half hesitant to approach. "Irene," I managed, forcing a smile. My voice cracked a little. She slid into the seat across from me, lowering her voice as she leaned forward. I almost didn't believe it when I heard, "What happened?" For a moment, I hesitated. It was one thing to suffer in silence. It was another to say it out loud, to give shape to the humiliation. But Irene's gaze was steady, and I realized I needed someone, anyone, who wasn't against me. "They threw me out," I whispered. "Marcus, Claire, right after I lost my job. Said I was dead weight." Irene's mouth fell open, her hand covering it. "You're kidding. After everything you've done?" I shook my head. Words felt heavy, like each one cost me a piece of myself. She leaned closer. "Thelina, you need to know something. My cousin works in HR at your company. She told me weeks ago that your mother-in-law called them. Said you were mentally unstable. That you couldn't be trusted. They took her seriously." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process her words. She called them?" Irene nodded, her eyes filled with pity and anger. "And Marcus was involved too. They wanted you gone before you even knew it." A dull roar filled my ears. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place. The condescending looks, the sudden coldness from my boss, the HR manager's rehearsed sympathy. It hadn't been bad luck, it had been sabotage. My mind flashed back to the day Marcus had asked me to sign the mortgage papers. He'd smiled that easy smile he always used when he wanted something. "It's just paperwork, babe. We need your name on the mortgage in case anything happens. Security, you know?" Back then, I thought it was trust. Now, it felt like a trap I'd walked right into. My chest ached as the betrayal cut deeper. Irene reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. "You're not crazy. You're not weak. They want you to believe that so you'll give up. Don't let them win." I stared at her, the sting in my eyes threatening to spill over. "I don't even know where to start, Irene. They've already taken so much." Her voice softened. "Then start by remembering who you are. You've always been stronger than you think." Ruby tugged at my sleeve then, sliding her sketch across the table. It was a little drawing of a house by the ocean, sunlight breaking over the waves. "For you, Mom," she said softly. My breath caught. The beach house. The one in Spain. My one secret card, untouched, unknown to Marcus or Claire. For the first time all day, a flicker of control lit inside me. I smiled at Ruby's drawing, stroking the paper gently. But inside, a storm was rising. They thought they'd buried me. They had no idea I was still holding the shovel. And I decided right then, I wouldn't just survive. I'd fight. The message came that afternoon, sharp and cold as a knife. "Mom wants to talk. Be here at 7. That was Marcus, never one to waste time on pleasantries. My chest tightened reading it, the words echoing in my mind like a verdict I hadn't asked for. Ruby glanced up from her drawing when she saw my face. "Is it Dad?" she asked softly. I forced a calm tone. "Yes, sweetheart. We'll have to go over to Grandma Claire's tonight." Her eyes dimmed. She knew what that meant. By the time we pulled into Claire's long, tree-lined driveway, the sky was folding into evening. The grand 2-story house glowed with chandeliers, every window lit like a stage. My hands tightened around the steering wheel before I cut the engine. Inside, the air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and polished wood. Claire sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture perfect, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. Marcus leaned back in his chair beside her, legs crossed, eyes glinting with smug satisfaction. A man in a navy suit, Gerald, their family lawyer, sat on her other side, a leather folder resting in front of him. "Thelina," Claire said, her voice dripping with sweetness that fooled no one. "Thank you for coming. We're all very concerned." I set my purse on the chair beside me and took a seat at the opposite end. "Concerned about what, exactly?" "About Ruby," she answered smoothly, folding her hands. "She needs stability, and right now, well, you can't provide it." The words struck like a slap. I felt my fingers curl into the fabric of my skirt under the table. Marcus's voice followed, calm but laced with disdain. You've lost your job. You don't have a stable home. Be reasonable, Talina. This isn't about you. It's about Ruby. I wanted to shout, but instead I swallowed the anger burning in my throat. Ruby has always had stability. With me. She knows she's safe with me. Claire's smile didn't falter. We're not questioning your love, dear, but love isn't enough when there are bills to pay and a future to secure. Don't you agree, Gerald? Gerald cleared his throat and opened the folder, sliding a neat stack of papers toward me. This is a simple agreement. It ensures Ruby remains in a secure environment. Marcus would assume financial responsibilities, and you would step back for now, to keep things calm for Ruby. I scanned the first page, my eyes darting over phrases that turned my stomach. Transfer of rights, sole decision-making authority, relinquishment of financial claims. I looked up sharply. This isn't about keeping things calm. This strips me of everything. You're asking me to erase myself from my own daughter's life. Marcus leaned forward, his tone flat, dismissive. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Talina. Just sign the papers. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury. You want me to disappear so you can control everything. Claire's tone never wavered. Think of Ruby. Do the right thing. She deserves a future we can provide. I stared at her, disbelief twisting in my chest. The woman had always been controlling, but tonight she looked almost satisfied, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Just then, the sound of soft footsteps on the marble floor drew our eyes. Ruby stood in the doorway, her sketchpad pressed to her chest, her hair mussed from a nap. Mom? She asked, her voice small. Claire stood quickly, ushering her toward the hall with a saccharine smile. Not now, sweetheart. Grown-ups are talking. Ruby's eyes flicked to me, worried. I gave her the smallest nod, a silent promise. The image of her face burned into me as Claire shut the door behind her. I looked back down at the papers, the pen Gerald had set beside them gleaming under the chandelier's light. My hand hovered, trembling, not with fear, but with the weight of a decision they'd never see coming, because I wasn't going to sign away my life, or my daughter's. The drive back to the apartment felt endless, though it was only 20 minutes from Claire's house. The streetlights blurred through the windshield, my hands stiff on the wheel. Ruby had dozed off in the passenger seat, her sketchpad still clutched to her chest. I glanced at her every few minutes, clinging to the calmness in her breathing to keep myself from unraveling. By the time I carried her upstairs and tucked her into the small bed in our rented apartment, the clock on the wall had slid past 10. The silence of the place felt heavier than ever. I sat at the tiny kitchen table, a single lamp casting a yellow glow, and pulled the leather folder from my bag. The papers were still there, crisp and waiting for me to surrender. I stared at the signature line until my eyes blurred. Maybe it would be easier if I just signed. The thought slipped in, uninvited, but persistent. At least Ruby wouldn't have to see me and Marcus fighting anymore. At least she'd have a home, even if it wasn't with me. My chest tightened, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. I pressed my palms into the table, whispering, maybe this is the only way. But then I remembered Ruby's face when Claire pushed her out of the room. That flash of worry, the way she clutched her sketchpad as if it was armor. No, if I signed, I'd be teaching her that giving in was the only way to survive. The vibration of my phone broke the silence. I glanced at the screen. Olivia. My breath caught. We hadn't spoken in months. I answered softly, careful not to wake Ruby. Olivia? Her voice was quick, urgent. Talina, I know it's late, but I couldn't hold this in anymore. Are you alone? Yes. What's wrong? I saw documents. Marcus and Claire. They've been planning this for weeks. They're trying to liquidate assets that are in your name. They even had signatures drafted. Yours, forged. My stomach flipped. How do you know? I work with someone in the finance office at your old company. They showed me the email chain. Claire bragged about how easy it would be once you did the right thing. Marcus sent instructions. Gerald was copied on all of it. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. My fingers tightened around the phone, the tears that had threatened earlier now turning to something colder. Can you send them to me? You'll have them in 2 minutes. A ding confirmed her words. I opened the email, scrolling through line after line of smug comments, back and forth messages about my supposed instability, and finally, scanned copies of my signature. My hand shook as I pressed the phone against my chest. They hadn't just hoped I'd give up. They'd already decided I was gone. I whispered into the quiet, "They think I'm already erased." And that was when the fog lifted. Signing those papers wouldn't protect Ruby. It would hand her over to people who had no shame in destroying me, even if it meant destroying her childhood along with me. I pushed the folder across the table, yanked the pen from the clip, and with one slow, deliberate motion, I drew a thick line through the signature box. The scratch of ink was louder than anything in the room. Then I closed the folder and exhaled, long and steady. My silence had been their weapon, but it could become my shield. They didn't need to know yet what cards I was still holding. I rose from the table and padded softly to Ruby's room. She stirred when I brushed the hair from her forehead, her eyes opening just a sliver. "Mom?" she murmured. "I'm right here," I whispered, kissing her temple. "I'm not going anywhere." She relaxed back into sleep, her sketch pad slipping onto the blanket. I tucked it gently beside her, a promise to us both. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dim glow of the lamp, listening to the faint sounds of the city outside, my mind sharper than it had been in weeks, because by morning I knew exactly where to strike back, and the first step was to expose their lies. 2 mornings later, I stood at the front door with a folder clutched under my arm, the early light creeping through the blinds. Ruby was still finishing her cereal at the kitchen table, her hair pulled into a loose braid I had managed in half-asleep hands. I knelt in front of her, brushing a strand from her cheek. "Mrs. Evans is going to watch you for a couple of hours, okay? I'll be back before lunch." She frowned. "Is this about Grandma and Dad again?" I forced a smile. "It's about keeping us safe. That's all you need to know right now." I left her in our neighbor's gentle care, then walked toward my car with a heartbeat that seemed louder than my footsteps. The manila folder pressed against my ribs felt heavier than stone, though I knew it held the only weapon I had right now, Olivia's evidence and the documents proving what was mine. The courthouse wasn't grand, just a brick building in downtown Houston with worn marble steps and a revolving door that creaked faintly. My palms were damp as I pulled the handle. Inside, the air smelled of paper and polish, the quiet broken only by the shuffle of shoes on tile. I approached the clerk's counter, sliding the folder forward with hands that only trembled slightly. She looked at me over her glasses. "Injunction filing?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I want to halt any attempt to sell properties in my name." Her eyes lingered on me longer than I expected. Maybe she saw the exhaustion behind my smile. She nodded, took the documents, and began stamping. With each thump of the seal, something inside me steadied. When she handed me the official copy, she said softly, "Good luck, ma'am." I had barely tucked the papers back into my folder when I heard the unmistakable echo of Marcus's voice down the hallway. "You've got to be kidding me!" he barked, anger sharp enough to cut glass. Claire followed close behind, heels clicking like gunshots on the tile. Gerald trailed them, his smirk already in place. Marcus pointed at me, eyes burning. "You had no right." I turned, holding the injunction calmly in front of me. "Actually," I said, my tone even, "I had every right." Claire's face flushed crimson. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss that carried anyway. "You think this changes anything? You're still nothing." I met her gaze without flinching. My voice was quiet, but it landed like a blade. "Maybe. But I'm nothing you can't touch anymore." For a moment, the hallway froze. Marcus blinked, his confidence faltering. Gerald scoffed, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Claire's lips parted, but no words came out. Her rage was there, hot, seething, but so was her fear. I didn't wait for them to recover. I turned and walked toward the exit, the echo of Claire's heels following me like a storm I no longer feared. The late morning sun felt warm on my face as I stepped outside. For the first time in weeks, my breath came easy. That evening, Ruby met me at the door, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Mom, are we okay?" I kissed the top of her head. "We're safe for now." She didn't need to know the details, not yet. All she needed was to feel the strength in my voice, the steadiness I was finally reclaiming. I tucked her into bed later, then sat alone in the living room, the quiet settling around me like a fragile shield. And then my phone buzzed. I reached for it, expecting a message from Olivia, or maybe Mrs. Evans checking in. But when I saw the name on the screen, my hand nearly went slack. It wasn't over. Because what I saw on the screen proved they weren't done with me yet. The next evening, I walked into the community hall with Ruby at my side, her small hand gripping mine tightly. The room hummed with low voices and the smell of coffee from the refreshment table in the back. I could feel eyes on me before I even reached a chair. Whispers rippled, sharp as pins against my skin. Claire was already there, perched in the front row like a queen waiting to be admired. When she caught my eye, her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned toward the woman beside her and said just loud enough for me to hear, "Poor girl, still pretending she matters." I didn't bite. I simply squeezed Ruby's hand and guided her to a seat in the middle row. Olivia stood near the back, her expression calm but encouraging, a quiet anchor in the storm. The meeting began with the usual chatter about landscaping and parking, but I barely heard a word. My folder lay on my lap, heavy as a brick, and every beat of my heart echoed in my ears. I could see Marcus watching me from across the room, his arm draped casually over the chair beside him, like he was the picture of stability. When the floor opened for discussion, Marcus was the first to rise. His voice slid smoothly through the hall, practiced and polite. "We've all seen how difficult the past few months have been for Thelina," he said, gesturing toward me with mock sympathy. "It's been hard on Ruby, too. I just hope we can all give her the support she needs as she tries to move on. But let's be honest, bitterness helps no one." A few neighbors nodded, the weight of his words pressing against me like a stone wall. I felt Ruby stiffen beside me. I waited until the murmur died down, then stood slowly, clutching my folder. My voice was steady, though inside I was trembling. "If we're talking about honesty, then let's be completely honest." I opened the folder and slid out the documents, holding them high enough for the first row to see. "These are loan applications Marcus and Claire submitted last month. They used my property as collateral, property that I own. And here," I tapped the notarized proof, the official stamp glinting under the overhead lights, "is the evidence." Gasps filled the room. Heads turned, whispers rose. I heard someone mutter, "Oh my God!" Marcus's face went red as he lurched forward. "These papers mean nothing. You don't know what you're talking about." Before I could answer, Judge Harper, a tall man with a calm presence, stood from the back row. His voice cut through the chaos like a gavel. "Actually, they mean everything. I reviewed these documents myself. They're legitimate." The room fell silent. Claire's face drained of color, and for the first time I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. Gerald looked down, embarrassed, his smirk gone. I met Judge Harper's gaze. He gave a small, reassuring nod. I turned back to the room. My voice was quiet, but carried. "I stayed silent too long. Not anymore." From beside me, Ruby clapped softly. The sound was small, innocent, but in that hush, it was louder than any accusation. Neighbors shifted in their seats, and for once their whispers weren't against me. I saw the judgment in their eyes turn, not at me, but at Marcus and Claire. I gathered my folder and walked toward the exit, my head high. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the truth was finally mine again. But just as I reached the parking lot, a hand gripped my arm from behind. I froze as Claire's voice slithered close to my ear, low and venomous. You've just declared war, Thelina. Claire's voice was low, venomous. You've just declared war, Thelina. Her hand slipped from my arm as neighbors spilled out of the hall behind us, their murmurs carrying in the cool night air. Porch lights glowed up and down the street, little spotlights illuminating faces filled with curiosity. I knew Claire had staged this. She wanted a scene, something she could twist into her own narrative. By the time Ruby and I reached our driveway, half a dozen neighbors were standing near their mailboxes, pretending to check letters, but clearly watching. Olivia had followed at a distance, and Judge Harper lingered near the curb, his presence silent but steady. Claire didn't waste time. She marched right up, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Do you feel proud?" she demanded, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Destroying your own family's reputation like that?" Before I could reply, Marcus emerged from the shadows of the porch, a folded document in his hand. His grin looked painted on, his knuckles white where they gripped the paper. "You all saw her little performance earlier," he said smoothly, raising the paper. "But here's the truth." He waved it for the crowd. "This shows the property isn't hers. She forged everything." Gasps. A few whispers. I felt Ruby clutch my hand tighter. I didn't flinch. Instead, I drew a slow breath and pulled my phone from my purse. My voice was calm, though my heart hammered in my chest. "You want proof, Marcus? Let's use yours." I tapped the screen and pressed play. The recording filled the yard, crystal clear under the quiet night. Marcus's voice, unmistakable. "As long as she doesn't know about the collateral, we're safe." Then Claire's laugh, sharp as glass. "She's too naive to notice. By the time she figures it out, we'll have everything signed." The neighbors froze. Hands went to mouths. I heard someone mutter, "Unbelievable." Marcus's face drained of color. Claire lunged forward, hissing, "Turn that off!" But Olivia stepped between us, her voice steady. "Don't you dare touch her." Judge Harper finally stepped closer, his tone carrying over the murmurs. "That's enough. This is over." His eyes locked on Marcus and Claire with quiet authority. For the first time, Marcus faltered. Claire looked around wildly, realizing every set of eyes was on her, and none held sympathy. Gerald, standing stiff near the porch, shifted his gaze to the ground, offering no rescue. Ruby tugged at my sleeve and whispered, her small voice trembling with relief. "They can't hurt us anymore, Mom." I bent slightly, pressing a kiss to her hair. Then I looked up, straight into the faces of the people who had whispered about me for weeks. My voice carried evenly. "I'm not leaving my home. And from now on, neither of them will ever control my life again." A silence stretched, heavy but different now, charged not with judgment, but with recognition. Neighbors began drifting away, shaking their heads, their looks sharp with disgust, not at me, but at Marcus and Claire. Claire muttered one last thing under her breath as she turned to storm back toward the porch. "You'll regret this." But it rang hollow, a threat stripped of teeth. Later that night, after Ruby had finally fallen asleep, I tucked her blanket close and brushed her hair from her forehead. I lingered for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. For the first time in a long time, I believed we might actually be safe. Then my phone lit up on the nightstand. A new message. I reached for it, my stomach tightening. The name on the screen nearly made me drop it. The sender's name was one I never expected, Judge Harper. His message was short, but it made my stomach twist. "Marcus is planning to challenge custody. He and Claire are already preparing false claims. Be ready." I stared at the glowing screen long after the message faded, the silence of my bedroom pressing in around me. I knew this war wasn't over. If anything, it had just shifted to a battlefield far more dangerous. A week later, I found myself sitting in a courtroom. The polished wood smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the air heavy with tension. Marcus sat across the aisle, his suit crisp, his jaw tight. Claire beside him with that same smug look she always wore when she thought victory was guaranteed. Ruby wasn't here. Thank God. But her safety weighed on every beat of my heart. Marcus's lawyer stood first, his voice smooth but cutting. "Your Honor, my client seeks primary custody of Ruby, Mrs. Thelina has proven unstable. She lost her job, has no stable residence, and her behavior has been erratic since her dismissal. I kept my face calm, though inside I wanted to shout. Claire leaned closer to Marcus, whispering something, and I caught the flicker of his satisfied smile. When it was my turn, I rose slowly. My palms felt damp, but my voice was steady. Your Honor, I may have lost my job, but I didn't lose my ability to provide for my daughter. I slid a folder across the bench. Property deeds, bank statements, proof of the company I still owned quietly. And then, the ace I'd saved until this moment, the deed to the beach house. Gasps rippled through the small courtroom as I set down the papers. Claire's face drained of color. Marcus's smug smile faltered. Judge Harper studied the documents, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up, his tone firm. Mr. Marcus, you nearly stripped this woman of her dignity. You will not strip her of her child. Marcus shifted in his seat, jaw clenched. Claire shot to her feet, her voice shrill. She's lying! She manipulated all of us! I met her gaze calmly, my voice low but clear. No, Claire. I simply refuse to be erased. The judge banged his gavel once, the sound echoing. Mrs. Thelina is granted full custody. Mr. Marcus may have supervised visitation pending further review. Court adjourned. The words washed over me like a tide I'd been holding back for years. Marcus stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls trembled. Claire sank back into her chair, whispering curses that no one cared to hear. Later that week, Ruby and I pulled into the driveway of the beach house. The sun was dipping low, painting the ocean waves with gold. I carried a box inside while Ruby ran from room to room, her laughter bouncing off the walls. We opened windows, letting the salty breeze sweep through. Ruby found a seashell we'd collected years ago on a vacation, holding it up like treasure. This belongs right here, she said, placing it carefully on the mantel. I watched her, my throat tightening. This house wasn't just walls and windows, it was proof. Proof that no matter how hard they tried, Marcus and Claire hadn't broken me. We planted flowers in the front yard that evening, our hands covered in dirt, our hearts light. Ruby looked up at me, her smile wide. This feels like home, Mom. I pulled her close, pressing my cheek against her hair as the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and blossoms. For the first time in so long, I felt free. They tried to bury me, I thought, gazing at the horizon. But I was the roots, and I grew back stronger. As the stars began to appear, I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. Do you think I was too cold for walking away without ever looking back? Or was it the only way to finally break free?